Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So, today we'll be discussing the Master as I saw him, and Nivedita is now speaking about or discussing about some of the key ideas that she heard during Swamiji's first visit to England. And most of the ideas were quite new for her, though she was familiar with the Vedantic ideas, some of the Vedantic ideas. It was more of theology than the practical applications. The spiritual implications of Vedanta were not very clear to her. And Swami Vivekananda had his own way of convincing or transmitting the highest spirituality to people around him. He was not just, as Sister Nivedita mentions in our previous talk, we saw that she never believed that Swami Vivekananda came for the intellectual audience or for people who are interested in philosophy. He didn't come to England as a philosopher. He came as a prophet to give something very concrete, to give some concrete ideas, some tangible spiritual values which people could understand. Not only people could understand, but also could transform themselves by these ideas. So, she comes to the conclusion, giving the examples of Mirabai and all the other saints whom Swami Vivekananda used to quote when he spoke of spirituality, practical spirituality, spirituality in practice. He described through the lives of some of the greatest saints of both East and the West, like Francis of Assisi, what were the common characteristics of people who were not just philosophers, but were the prophets of the highest order or saints of the highest order? Whether it was Christianity or whether it was Hinduism, any sect within Hinduism, or even some of the great prophets of Islam, Sufis of Islam, he said, the idea that she finally, the takeaway that she mentions here, that when he gave this message, the Swami never compromised on one idea, that we may be at different levels of spirituality, she says, but if you speak of the highest spirituality, it can never tolerate the world. You can't have, as Jesus spoke, he spoke some very harsh truths, that God and mammon cannot, you cannot have God and mammon at the same time. So these prophets, they had no fear. They were not there to please the world. They were not, according to her, according to Nivedita, she says, in one aspect, one aspect of the master which she admired was that he was very liberal when it came to opinions. He gave the freedom, everybody the freedom to think the way they wanted to, because he knew that people were traveling from lower truth to higher truth. But when it came to the highest principles, principles that we see in the life of Jesus, principles that we see in the lives of Krishna and the prophets and Buddha, that the highest, maybe we cannot reach it, but the highest spirituality and worldliness cannot go together. So she uses a word, she quotes, she writes in the last paragraph which we discussed last time, that the highest spirituality cannot tolerate the world. It may not sound like great music to people who are so much attached to the world, but that doesn't mean we have to lower our ideal. It's okay at our stage, perhaps we can only gradually give up the world. But if one has to have the highest spirituality, then there should be no compromise. You can't have God and mammon at the same time. Now, she says in the next paragraph, which is very important, we understood very clearly, we means those who are sincere disciples of Swamiji. That small group, we are still, she has not started giving all the public talks. You see the small parlor talks where he found some eager people, like the group that he saw or group that he addressed in Thousand Island Park. Only 12 disciples were there. They were intensely sincere disciples, so the message he gave to them was the highest message. Just as Jesus gave so many messages in the Bible, but the Sermon on the Mount was to some selected disciples, like Sri Ramakrishna gave selected to some selected disciples who would be renouncing the world, a separate set of advice or advices which he asked them to come on days. In the gospel you will find that when there was a big crowd, you will not find most of the young disciples who later on became monks. They were asked to come on weekdays because they could manage to get leave, whereas those who were householders had to come only on Saturdays and Sundays, that or some public holiday. So you find most of the recordings of the gospel, there are most of the days are Saturday or Sunday or a public holiday. But if you see the core advice he reserved for his own disciples, he used to call, sometimes he used to call his favorite disciple like Naren or Brahmananda, Rakhal. They were very dear to him, not because uh, he had some partiality towards them, but because they exhibited the highest. He knew that these were the people who were capable of understanding the highest message. So he had a different message for different people. We cannot say he spoke one thing to one person and another thing to another person. He was very consistent. But Sri Ramakrishna, and like him, Swami Vivekananda also, did not compromise when the highest ideal was concerned, the highest spirituality, whether it is uh, a Christian faith or whether it is a Hindu faith or any Sufi tradition. Swami Vivekananda, Sister Nivedita says, he said the highest spirituality cannot tolerate the world. So what does it mean? It simply means, in the language of the Bible, as Jesus said, God and mammon cannot go together. So what about the other people? There were graded advice, there were lower truths which are applicable to other people. But if we want the highest spirituality, then highest spirituality in all traditions cannot tolerate the world. This is a sentence she has written. Then she says, we understood clearly enough that these were ideals of sainthood only. So there are many ideals Swamiji spoke of. All cannot be saints. So the ideals of sainthood, he never compromised. If it is to be, if the ideals of sainthood were discussed, she says, he spoke of the highest ideals. But she says at the same time, we were learning chapter after chapter of a great language, which was to make it easy for us to hold communion with the ends of the earth. That means there were these two traditions. As Mark Twain said, East is East and West is West. The twain shall never meet. But Swamiji said, no, there is no such thing as East or West. Truth is truth. Whether it comes from the East or comes from the West, you can't have one scientific theory for the East, another scientific theory. At least if you have a scientific approach to religion, then there is no such thing as East or West. The culture may differ, the language may differ, the customs may differ, the food may differ, but the truth will not change. The truths of spirituality, just as the truths of gravity in the material world, they are universal. So she says, it was easy for the Western disciples because he spoke, they were learning chapter after chapter of a great language. Language means the language of Vedanta. And he made it so easy. That is what Swami Vivekananda said, my great mission in life is to extract from this great, vast Sanskrit literature, very, very complicated and difficult ideas, and put them in the English language so that even a child can understand. He says, those who have attempted to do that, they will understand how great that task was. After that, so many yogis and gurus went to the West. Most of them used the vocabulary because Swami Vivekananda was the first to take the message of the East and interpret it in the language which was spoken by a majority of people all over the globe. English language was spoken in those days, obviously, because England ruled, colonized many countries. English was spoken. So perhaps Swamiji found it worthwhile to translate all the difficult Sanskrit ideas, the ideas which are found in our Sanskrit scriptures, which are very difficult to understand, to to convert them or to make interpret them in a language, English language. So he says, chapter after chapter of a great language, which was to make it easy for us to hold communion with the ends of the earth. Ends of the earth means east and the west. We gathered no confusion as to those questions which concern the life of citizenship and domestic virtue, like dharma and artha, kama. These ideals are accepted. There is a thing known as citizenship, which is nothing but dharma. Domestic virtue means how to lead a life in the world. That is one thing. So concerning dharma, artha and kama, that is legitimate desires, which a majority of the people follow, she says there was no confusion. We gathered no confusion. The ideas of swadharma, the ideas of dharma, the ideas of domestic virtue, the local ideas of different ideas of swadharma according to different cultures, different ideals of citizenship. Regarding that, there was no confusion and form what we may be regarded as the kindergarten of the soul. But at the same time, he said, yes, you may think that citizenship, nationalism, and all the great civic ideals, they are fine. They are necessary, in fact, otherwise society will collapse. But they are the kindergarten of the soul. They are necessary, absolutely necessary, when a soul is slowly evolving towards spiritual values. But at the same time, one should not stop at that. That is what Sister Nivedita says. That is the idea I gave. And she says the idea that one country might best advance itself by learning to appreciate those ideals of order and responsibility which form the glory of another was in no wise discredited. Means he was, for the first time, he said, why should East be East and West be West? Why should the ideals of Eastern be exclusive to the Eastern people? And why should the people of the West think, oh no, this is our ideal, this is our religion? He said, no, the ideals of the order and responsibility which form the glory of another culture, if there are some good ideas, we have to accept them and take whatever suits us. As our Vedas say, let noble thoughts come to us from all sides. So our Vedic rishis, they were very liberal. They said, if a good idea comes, it may come from any direction. It may come from the west, it may come from the north, it may come from the south. So all the ideas, good ideas of citizenship, of responsibility, of dharma, which were developed, and not only developed, but it promoted cultures all over the world. For example, he said Rome was the country which gave the whole world the ideas of politics and administration, how the ideas of democracy, how people's power can be converted into a benevolent rule which creates and maintains an order. So if people just behave the way they want, then there cannot be any administration. So politics and administration, a democratic setup, so many things was the contribution of Rome. Similarly, he said there was this Greek culture which developed the arts and sciences. Very clearly, he said that arts and sciences that we get now, directly or indirectly, they had their birth. Of course, the Europeans, it spread all over Europe, and people all over Europe developed it. Some countries developed it more, but this arts and sciences, the physical sciences, was another great contribution. So you can't just neglect them. That which form the glory of another, we have to absorb. That is why Swamiji conveyed this idea to his disciples, especially Nivedita and the other disciples in England. And she says that the ideals of order and responsibility developed by one culture should be appreciated by which form the glory of another culture. You should not discredit them. Can't dismiss them. Maybe they are not commensurate with your ideals. Your ideals may be spirituality, but that doesn't mean there are no people in your country who don't need science. They need at different levels. So it was given to different cultures, three basic cultures, the Roman, the Greek, and the Indian or the Oriental, which developed three different aspects of life. One is governance, politics, administration. The Romans gave it to the entire world, directly or indirectly, all the ideas of parliament and all those things. But at the same time, another country that is, though it was born in Greece, it was not restricted to Greece. It spread all over Europe. The ideas of a scientific approach to the material world, which resulted not only in sciences but also the arts, the wonderful arts. Of course, other cultures also had their arts and sciences. It's not that Romans did not have. Romans also had their own art and own sciences. But they gave more importance to politics, rule, administration, and all those things. Whereas Indians also had their art, culture, politics. We also had our kings. But most of the people focused more on the spiritual values, spirituality. So all the three cultures together can make the glory of one added to the glory of another, all put together makes an ideal citizen. That is what she says here. Now, at the same time, she says, we were given, we means the disciples, the selected disciples, as the eternal watchword of the Indian ideal. He said he didn't compromise on that. That the eternal watchword of the Indian ideal. See the language he is using. The eternal watchword of all the Indian ideals. Indians also had dharma, artha, kama. But moksha was something which Indians never compromised. And she again says, she doesn't say that, she doesn't hint that Christ might have borrowed this. Any religious person who focused on pure spirituality believed that spirituality can never tolerate the world. So you can't have both God and mammon, as Jesus said, and as the Upanishad says that through tyaga alone the mukti or moksha can be attained. Then she asks another question now. If that is the ideal, then what about a majority of the people who cannot live without the world? So is Swamiji condemning them, saying that people cannot, if you can't tolerate spirituality, can't tolerate the world, what will happen to their spirituality? Then she asks a question, as if question, did we in contradiction point to monastic orders, well governed, highly organized, devoted to public good, and contrast our long roll of abbots, bishops, and saintly lady abbesses with a few ragged and God intoxicated beggars of the East? That means she says, this when he tried to spell out this idea that how spirituality can be sustained or can be cultivated by people by not tolerating the world, there were two approaches. The few ragged and God intoxicated beggars of the East. So we had Saint Francis and his group who also believed in almost the similar ideals of a wandering monk. They did not restrict themselves, though later on they were highly organized, well governed, but that came much later. Most of them preferred to lead the life of a wandering monk. So she says, did he point out, did we in contradiction point to the monastic orders? Did he make a comparison of the Western monastic orders, the Buddhist monastic order, which was compared to the Hindu monastic? Hindus were mostly disorganized in the sense spirituality was an individual pursuit. And very often you will find lot of monks like Totapuri and so many, there is a tradition where though they are trained in the orders, they somehow at some stage leave the order and wandering, and you will find they are, they are known as beggars, in the sense they don't live on the charity of householders like the monastic orders of the West did. So she is saying that, easy comparing the two and trying to say that the East also needs a monastic order. Then she says, yet we have to admit that even in the West, when the flame of spirituality had blazed suddenly to its brightest, it had taken their form. Their form means the Hindu form of individual monasticism. For those who know the land of Mirabai and Chaitanya, of Tukaram and Ramanuja, they can hardly resist the impulse to clothe with the yellow garb the memory of Saint Francis of Assisi also. So that he says that it's not only in the East. No doubt that there were these well organized monastic orders which Buddha thought he had to start, because everybody did not have the strength to lead the life of bhiksha or this poor, the brothers of, like the brothers of Saint Francis of Assisi, who used to wore torn clothes, and the clothes which were rejected by people, they used to wear those clothes and beg and live very intensely, sort of life of a begging mendicant of the East. So that though there were a few orders like that of Francis of Assisi, she says that maybe the inspiration was derived from the land of Mirabai, Chaitanya, Tukaram. They were all, though they were householders to begin with, they all renounced. Mirabai also renounced her palace. Chaitanya renounced his wife and children. Tukaram also practically was like a beggar saint. Ramanuja, of course, was a monk. So she says that, was he pointing out that your monastic orders, the well organized Vatican, the church, and all the huge buildings and organized religion is on one side, but you also had your Saint Francis and other things. So then she changes the topic now. She says that he was always trying to point out that this highest ideal of moksha or salvation, which cannot tolerate the world, is not unique to the East. It is there in the West also. That is what she is trying to say in this paragraph. Now she comes to the next para, in which she says, in one of the volumes of the English translation of the Jataka birth tales, they are concerning Buddha, there occur over and over again the words, she is quoting that from the birth tales of Buddha. Jataka are the famous Buddhist tales. Said, when a man has come to that place where he dreads heaven as much as hell. Now this is a tremendous statement which the Buddhist, or maybe this Jataka tales explain or try to emphasize, that true Vairagya will come when a person does not run after heaven. He finds heaven as much binding or as much a obstruction to the ideal of moksha than hell. So hell, of course, nobody wants. When one is in hell, one wants to get out of it, be free from it. But that can happen only when he dreads heaven as much as hell. That is what she says. That is the new idea she got from Swamiji, and which of course came from the Jataka tales. So he says, when man has come to that place where he dreads heaven as much as hell, and I don't know how the realization that the Swami's presence brought could be better described. Most of those, means most of the people who listened to him in London in the year 1896, caught some glimpse by which they were led to understand a little of the meaning of the Eastern longing to escape from incarnation. Incarnation means rebirth. Here she is not talking of the avatara. We are also incarnating again and again. So he was giving a glimpse to this Eastern, to the Western people of the great Eastern idea of how not only to escape hell, but not only aspire for, aspire to prevent going from hell, but also avoid heaven, because that will also become an obstruction. That will also be a bondage. So heaven is a equally, as Swami Vivekananda used to say in his poem, famous poem, that there may be an iron chain which can bind you, but a gold chain also can bind you. It may be gold, but as far as its binding property is concerned, it can bind you. So also, hell of course curses you and from freedom that you desire, but the same thing is also true about heaven. So the Eastern longing, she says, the idea that the whole year 1896, when he gave all the wonderful talks on Jnana Yoga in Piccadilly in London, most of the talks after the parlor talks, they were regular talks in Princess Hall and other places in London. So on Victoria Street also there was a hall which they had hired. But one theme which she liked was, he was trying again and again to make people understand a little of the meaning of the Eastern longing to escape from rebirth or incarnation. Because mukti was a new ideal, though Christianity believes in salvation, but what does salvation mean? Is it same as mukti? We don't know. There are different interpretations. Every theologian will give a different interpretation. Maybe some mean eternal heaven, as they say, after the day of judgment you will be promoted, you will be sent to heaven or eternally damned to hell. That are some ideas of salvation. But mukti, which is to escape from rebirth, which perhaps dominated the Eastern philosophies. All the Eastern ideas are, however, whether through bhakti, through jnana, through karma yoga, or even through yoga, the goal does not change. That this incarnation, this rebirth is a painful thing. Buddha says, I don't know whether there is God or not, or avatara. I don't want to discuss that philosophy. But I know one thing, that this incarnation is a terrible suffering. Birth, then death, then followed by again birth, going through all that struggle, education, childhood, youth, old age, and one fine day, just leave everything behind and die, to be born again. So is this eternal cycle which Buddha was tired of, which all the Eastern prophets, they pointed out that this longing to escape from incarnation is the central theme of Indian spirituality. And he says he was struggling, he worked very hard to make these Western people understand a little of the meaning of the Eastern longing. Moksha is such a difficult ideal. People don't want this. Even in India, why in the West? One should not say that in the West alone these ideals. It's very few who have that mumukshutvam. That's why Shankaracharya said, Among thousands of people, some people try, the desire for mukti is there only for only among a few people, even among the sadhakas. All do not want mukti. So it is a rare ideal, but Swamiji was keen to show that this is the Eastern ideal, whether it is Buddhism, whether it is Jainism, whether it is yoga, which says you get rid of all the attachments of Prakriti and become one with Purusha and enjoy the glory, or maybe be one with the pure consciousness. So everything in the Eastern thought was this longing to escape from incarnation or from rebirth, which Swamiji pointed out to them. But the master of all these moods and dominating them was one that had barely been hinted at. In the words, if this is true, what other thing could matter? If it is not true, what do our lives matter? This is the line which inspired Sister Nivedita to totally change her. The transformation was so powerful that she is quoting this word again and again. That was the statement he made in that small parlor meeting, where most of the people would not have understand what he wanted to say, but Nivedita could catch it. And that motivated her, inspired her to give up her life for Swamiji's mission. Now, what was that sentence which she is again repeating this, but she is repeating part of that sentence. So she says that was the mood in which he was a real master, and there were many other ideas he gave in different exalted moods, but the master of all these moods and dominating them was one that had barely been hinted at in the words, if this is true, what other thing could matter? If this is not true, then what do our lives matter? Before that, he said something which Nivedita quoted. He said, I want just 20 men and women. Are there 20 means he was discussing some high ideals, and there were questions. As Sister Nivedita mentions, the background she gives, that they were asking all trivial questions. Suddenly Swamiji came, got into a very strange mood, and that was the dominating mood which inspired Sister Nivedita. I said, are there 20 men or I just want 20 men and women who can stand in the yonder street, pointing out through the window. He said, who can stand there and say that I want nothing but God? How many? Who is going to come? And everybody kept quiet. Nobody will definitely like to follow this ideal, because how is it possible that one can give up everything and go into the street and say, I want God and God alone? And he said, I just want 20 people. Then the second sentence is she's quoting now. If this is true, if this means this giving up the world for God, if that is true, what other thing could matter? Then what you do, what you don't do, all the things, all our endeavors, all our activities and everything, what will it matter? And suppose that is not true, that God is not true. If it is not true, then what do our lives matter? That means if mukti is not true, then why are we living? Then we are no better than animals, because our lives really don't matter. We will live our span of life, whatever is, like any other animal, any other plant. We will be born, die, born, grow and die. That anyway everybody is doing. So if for some reason, it is not not that it is not true, but he says, if this ideal is not true, if it is true, then what other things could matter? Means you will be forced to follow that. So this inspired Nivedita. He said, if this ideal is true, what other thing could matter? And if it is not true, if moksha or mukti or freedom, if it is not true, then what do our lives matter? because they are all ephemeral. They come, we come and born and we die. This the cycle of birth and rebirth, that meaninglessness of life was what motivated Buddha to find out what is the true purpose of life. So Swami Vivekananda also hinted, and Sister Nivedita caught this mood, this dominating mood in 1896 in London. Then she says, for there was a power in this teacher, I mean the master, Swami Vivekananda, to sum up all the truths he himself had to come to teach, together with his own highest hope. Of course, the highest hope was at least will 20 people come who can, like his guru and like he himself, say that God alone is the goal of life. So how many people will come? Say, will 20 come? That was his highest hope. And to treat the whole as a mean bribe to be flung away fearlessly if need were for the good of others. So he was tempting them in the sense he was giving a challenge to some of the sensitive people. Of course, Nivedita was definitely one of them. Otherwise, she would not have written this wonderful book. The master, as I saw him, this was the idea that inspired her. And she immediately took a decision, though she went to India in 1898, 2 years after that. But these were the words which she says, he had a power to sum up all the truths and drop them like a bomb, as he used to say. So, years after, this spoke more clearly in the indignant reply with which he turned to some remark of my own. She was arguing all the time. And Swamiji liked it because she was the one who did not accept everything. If she had some doubt, she will ask. And she says, years afterwards, I again asked him, of course, I would commit a crime and go to hell forever if by that I could really help a being. When she said that, she of course referred to Ramanuja. You all know Ramanuja's teacher had told him, his guru had told him that the mantra that I have given you is secret. Don't make it public. Then Ramanuja was such an unselfish person that he said if it fit, and he really found that this name, if people repeat, they will be freed. Thousands of people. Why is his guru telling him not to repeat? Then he asked, what will happen? What will happen if I chant this mantra? Then his guru said, you will go to hell. But he was so convinced that whoever repeats this mantra will get mukti or will realize God. So he says, if by telling this mantra, making it public, so he goes on the top of the temple and loudly started shouting and giving that mantra to everybody, knowing fully well that his guru has told him that you will go to hell. He said, it's okay, I'll go to hell, but my going to hell by that, if I give this mantra, if it is really powerful, then everybody will be freed. That is much better, even if it means that one person goes to hell. So she was asking this question. And when she mentioned that, it was the same impulse that spoke also, and his constant repetition to some of us, as if it had a special bearing on the present age, the tale of that bodhisattva who had held himself back from nirvana till the last grain of dust in the universe should have gone in before him to salvation. So, here she says this, when she said that, when this Ramanuja's example and other things were discussed, he also said Buddha also did the same thing. He could have easily gone and attained nirvana. In fact, he could have merged himself. But as Sri Ramakrishna had told Swamiji, that how come you are aspiring for nirvana yourself? You are like a big banyan tree. Under your shade, many people will get nirvana. You are so selfish, you want your own nirvana. So that was the spirit of Bodhisattva, that is Buddha, where he held himself from getting that nirvana till the last the grain of dust in the universe. That means the least of people. He was so unselfish, he was ready to sacrifice for them. So also, then she says, she adds, does it mean that the final mark of freedom lies in the ceasing from the quest of freedom? Now, this is a great idea she got from Swamiji. If you hamper for your own mukti, the person is really free if he even gives up the desire for freedom. That is the final mark of freedom. So she asks this question, does it mean that the final mark of freedom lies in ceasing from the quest of freedom? I have found the same thing since in many Indian stories, in Ramanuja for instance, breaking his vow and proclaiming the sacred mantra to all the paryas. In Buddha, keeping no secret but spending his whole life in work. In Shishupala, now this is another example which people don't realize. Shishupala chose to be the enemy of God. He had a boon that if he follows the right path, then maybe he has to live for three paths or three lives to get realization. But he said, if you choose to become the enemy of God, you will be killed by God, but you will get mukti immediately because of that. So they say he chose the second option. He didn't choose the smoother way. He said, no, I don't mind getting killed because this body is of no use. So here she is comparing Ramanuja's giving the mantra and prepare to go to hell, like Shishupala choosing to be the enemy of God. So if we want to be a devotee of God, he was told that he might have to spend several lives to realize him. But if he gets killed by God himself and he chooses to be the enemy of God, he can get mukti sooner. So in the innumerable legends of the saints that many people in the West, they find it very difficult to understand. What is this fighting God? But they don't realize that these were great devotees who, I remember a similar incident where one of the great disciples of Holy Mother, Swami Premeshanandji, who belonged to one of the now what is known as Bangladesh in Sylhet, he was a school teacher, and he inspired a lot of young people to join the mission, and they became monks earlier than him. He was their teacher, and at a very old age he joined. So he was keen and he motivated a lot of people to become monks. He was so unselfish, so keen that others should also get to know about Ramakrishna, about the monastic order, and then he inspired a lot of young boys in that area and they became monks. Now, in his own life, we see that when he came to Holy Mother, he was quite old compared to the other people whom he sent, and they become monks earlier. But when he came to Holy Mother just by seeing him said, my child, if you want mukti in this life, there are two options. If you want, it will take 3 births to get mukti, but in a very smooth way. But if you want mukti in this life, then you will have to suffer a lot, because all the karma has to be worn away. I mean, you have to get rid of all the karma, so that you will have to suffer a lot. So he chose, it is said that he chose to get mukti in this life. And of course, you see towards the end of his life, he had so many incurable diseases. He was in Banaras, lying on bed, so many things. But he happily chose that option rather than having a healthy life and coming to birth again. He said, no, I don't want 3 births. Who will wait for 3 births? It's better whatever suffering is there, I can finish it in this life. So, these innumerable legends, there are other legends in our scriptures where some of the great devotees of the Lord chose to die or chose to face a lot of suffering rather than give up the idea for mukti. If you want a comfortable life, then perhaps you have to give up the idea of mukti. Maybe you'll have to be born again and again. But people are in a hurry, like Shishupala, like Ramanuja, like Buddha. They all, like Ramanuja and all, they believed that. So the giving up, the final conclusion, Sister Nivedita, she says she heard from Swamiji, or she was inspired by this, reading these different tales which she heard from the first time, heard from the mouth of her guru. She says does it mean that the final mark of freedom lies in giving up the quest of freedom for the sake of others? Of course, it's not that one doesn't want mukti, but that intense desire, that intense unselfishness itself is a higher uh, impulse. It's the final mark of true freedom. If a person is selfishly holding on to his own freedom, perhaps he may get it slowly. But if he gives up and sacrifices himself, so that was the idea she got. But then she says the Swami was not always entirely impersonal. Once after a lecture, he was talking of impersonal God most of the time, because he knew that if he talks of a personal God, the Westerners will not accept, because they have their own Christ. Why will they accept another God from another culture? So dualism is very difficult to be established. In those days, it was difficult to be established. But she says Swami was not always entirely impersonal. Once after a lecture, he came up to a small group of us and said, a propose of some subject that had been opened up. He proposed and said, I have a superstition. He suddenly said to this small group, it is nothing, but a personal superstition. And suddenly, because he never discussed personalities, though he admired personalities, admired Jesus, admired Krishna, he admired his own guru, Sri Ramakrishna, but he rarely spoke about, the impersonal aspect of God, Brahman or the pure consciousness, because that appealed to the scientific mind or the rational mind of the West. But sometimes he said, I have a personal superstition. Suddenly he comes and tells them. He said the same soul who came once as Buddha came afterwards as Christ. And then, lingering on the point of departure, he drifted into talk of his old master, that is Sri Ramakrishna, of whom we then heard for the first time, and of the girl who, wedded and forgotten, gave her husband freedom with tears. So, first time they had heard about his guru, and of course the Holy Mother, who was very young when she married Sri Ramakrishna, and his voice had sunk lower as he talked till the tones had become dreamlike. But finally, almost in soliloquy, he took off the mood that had stolen upon him, saying with a long breath, yes, yes, these things have been in the past and they will again be. Go in peace, my daughter. Thy faith has made thee whole. That means he used to go into those rare moods where he saw the chain of incarnations who come and speak the same language, who come as Christ, who come as Buddha, who come as Sri Ramakrishna in this age. So every time the prophet comes, or the incarnations come, they come with that same mood. And then he said, yes, yes, these things have been and they will again be. It's not that with this incarnation, as some of the religions believe, that after this there will be no incarnation. No, he says these things have been in the past and they will again be. Like Bhagavad Gita says, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. I manifest again and again. And then he says, go in peace, my daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. So in the course of a conversation, much more casual than this, sometimes in the strange mood you speak that, say that Buddha was the one who was again born as Christ and all those things. But sometimes he was more casual. And he turned to me and said, suddenly he used to come down after talking these great ideals, he is to come down to a more practical problem which he had in mind. He says, I have plans for the women of my own country in which you, I think, could be of great help to me. So again, after giving the highest ideal, again he is brought down to the plane of the suffering women in his own country because of lack of education and poverty and all those things. He says, can you help me in this? And I knew that I had heard a call which would change my life. So she knew that after speaking this wonderful truth, the highest truth, that God alone is real, everything is unreal, he suddenly comes down and tells a practical problem about which he is really concerned, the plans for the women of his own country. And that inspired her, that a person who can easily go and have his own mukti, but see how much is suffering that his women are in bondage. He wants them to be economically, socially free before even they can aspire to become spiritually free. So he had come down to 3 stages to convince her or to inspire her, saying that if you really want others' mukti, then work out the mukti of these young women. So then he says, what his plans were, I did not know, because he didn't tell her. Even after she went to India, for 2 years, he just asked her to be familiar with the Indian ideals. He arranged for her teaching, and he wanted to make her fully Indianized so that she can solve the problems of Indian girls in the Indian way. So there's no chance that she knew what he wanted her to do. He says, about his plans, I did not know. What these plans were, I did not know. And the effort of abandoning the accustomed perspective was for the moment so great that I did not care to ask. So she was so much convinced that the power with which he told her that you are the person who can do this, it inspired her so much that she didn't even bother to ask, what am I going to do? He said, what is the need of planning? He is inspiring me. He is a person with such prophetic utterance. He is trying to explain to me the role that I have to play for the upliftment of women. So she didn't care to ask. Deliberately she didn't ask because she was overwhelmed that her guru had so much faith in her. You see, that inspired her. A person who says, I have plans for the women of my own country and you could be of great help. A guru asking his disciple to help him, that itself was a great motivation for her. And it was such a great motivation that she did not even care to ask, what shall I do there? How can I work? She didn't want, she said, it is enough if she says that and I will dedicate myself, and perhaps she takes the decision after that. So we will discuss it in the next class. So if there are some questions you can ask. There seems to be one question. Yes. Is there any question or I'll conclude? It's 8:03 now, almost 8 o'clock. So we had a Chandi, we have Chandi chanting in fact every day from 5 to 6, followed by Aarti and a few bhajans. So this will go on. Only on Saturday the timing will be slightly changed. It will be from 4 to 5 instead of 5 to 6 Saturday. Otherwise it will be the same. And Sunday, of course, I have given the programs. You can attend. We'll try to have most of those programs online as much as possible. Today we succeeded in improving the quality of the songs and the recording. So I hope tomorrow if you are free, you can. Tomorrow there will be no class, of course, because it is Friday. So Friday we don't have a class. Saturday there will be no class because of this chanting and other things. I think we may not be able to, we may have to cancel the class because the Gita class is conducted by university and they will be busy with Shashti and all. So they will not be conducting the class, our university. So that's why there will be no class on Saturday. And Sunday, of course, we might have the class. I will announce later. We have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna this time. We will have it. Okay. I'll take your leave. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.